What do you think? Is Boris Johnson bluffing?
Biz de kapıları açmak zorunda kalırız. Kapıları açmak zorunda kalırız.
Recep Tayyip Erdogan vows to allow migrants in Turkey to leave for Europe as he bids for more support from the West. Greece's prime minister hit out in response, accusing President Erdogan of trying to threaten Europe. So we're asking, should the EU bow to Turkey's threats?
Don't think I can do this.
Was? Of course you can.
Aber dann kamst du.
When I was your age, I had an imaginary friend. Got me in so much trouble.
And a black comedy about a boy whose imaginary best friend is Adolf Hitler premiered at the Toronto Film Festival last night. A boy questions his Nazi beliefs after his mother decides to shelter a Jewish girl in her attic.
Nothing makes sense anymore. Yeah, I know. It's definitely not a good time to be a Nazi.
Ahead of the comedy's European release, we're asking, is Germany ready to laugh at Hitler? So come on, Europe, get involved and have your say. Is Boris Johnson bluffing? Should the EU bow to Turkey's threats? And is Germany ready to laugh at Hitler? And joining us here in the studio to join us in the debate, we have John Worth. He is an EU policy expert with the blog Euroblog.com, and he's also a visiting professor at the College of Europe. So, John, what do you want callers to call in about?
Well, I've obviously been following the Brexit topic most closely. It's been the topic of many of my blog entries.
And you are the chart guy.
Yeah, exactly. I make these complicated
chart
Brexit charts. So if you want to find out what's going to happen to Boris Johnson, whether you think he's bluffing, those are the ones where I can probably add the most. Although I'm British as well, I live in Germany, so maybe on the third topic there about whether Germany's actually ready to laugh about its difficult history, I can probably contribute something there too.
So those of you who want to talk to John, do call in with your thoughts and your questions. And also joining us tonight, we have Hannah Neumann. She is a German MEP with the Greens EFA group. What about you, Hannah?
I mean, given my background in foreign and security policy, I might be best suited to talk about the Turkey issue. Nevertheless, as a German, I have to say I'm very interested in all of your take on the movie question.
Oh, that's an interesting topic right there, all right?
Well, it's great to have you both. Thank you so much for coming along here. And thank you, of course, for watching tonight. Raw Politics, your call. Our lines are officially now open. So get on the phone or Skype us if you like. Our team are downstairs waiting for you to dial in. Our number is 800 33 37002. You can always send us an email at rawpaul@euronews.com, or you can tweet to us using the hashtag #RawPolitics. Or, of course, follow our live Facebook stream and leave your comments right underneath there.
We're all on our gadgets waiting for you to get in touch. Okay, so before we move on, let's cross over to the Euronews headquarters in Lyon for the latest news update with Isabel.
Hi there, Tessa and Maeve. Well, these are our top stories tonight. The British Parliament is scheduled to shut down tonight, but not before Prime Minister Boris Johnson makes one final bid to call a snap election before the country's October 31st Brexit deadline. Now, it's the second time Mr Johnson has tried to send Britain to the polls in less than a week. MPs rejected a similar election motion on Wednesday. It comes as the Queen approved a law that will force Mr Johnson to request another Brexit extension from the EU if MPs haven't approved a withdrawal agreement by October the 19th. Italy's Prime Minister says his new government will be less argumentative and more respectful than his previous coalition. While speaking ahead of a vote of confidence, Giuseppe Conte promised less conflict with the EU and to work to revive the economy and cut taxes. The vote follows the collapse of the last coalition government when the League, led by Matteo Salvini, pulled out. And British Airways pilots are beginning a 2-day strike over pay in what's been described as the biggest shutdown in the airline's history. Well, at least 1,700 flights have been cancelled, disrupting the plans of thousands of travellers. Another stoppage has been pencilled in for September the 27th. And those are our top stories. Back over to you in Brussels. We'll be back at the top of the hour.
All right, thanks for that, Isabel. Okay, let's get right to it. Brexit, obviously, something we're watching tonight as well, because so many things are going to be unfolding tonight. So, John, let's start with you being the Brexit expert here. Is Boris Johnson bluffing?
I don't think that Boris Johnson is bluffing. Boris Johnson has made this promise to the British people that he's going to take the UK out of the European Union on 31st of October. And it looks like there's almost nothing that he will stop at to actually achieve that.
Even if he defies a law, a legislation passed by
Ultimately,
Parliament.
I don't think he's going to come to the point where that will actually come to pass. Because bear in mind that after Parliament has gone through this so-called prorogation, i.e. this period where Parliament's not sitting, there's 3 days before the European Union has its European Council summit here in Brussels. During that period, I think it's very highly likely that Boris Johnson would be subjected to a vote of no confidence in the British Parliament before he would be put on the spot of whether he would break the law or not. So ultimately, I think that even the House of Commons might choose to take even that out of his hands. The difficulty is he's basically made a promise he can't keep, and he's now scrabbling around to try and find ways and means of managing to respect it. And that causes him quite some difficulty.
Okay, well, what about you, Hannah? What do you think?
I have to say, looking from afar, even if you are a Europe nerd, it's hard to keep track of what is happening and who is doing what and what's going to happen. I also don't think he's in a bluff.
Okay.
But rather than centering on what is Boris Johnson doing, I would like to also think about the question what would be best for Great Britain, for the European Union, and also for Ireland, because he's holding this Ireland and especially the conflict in Northern Ireland hostage. And as much as we might center on Boris Johnson, really let's discuss about this question. And there I think we have to find a way out of the deadlock. And if this means that we have to postpone the Brexit deadline, I'm pretty confident that we might get a majority on that in the European Parliament. But we have to see some room or something happening. So a new election could be one thing. I think it would even be better if we could go for a new referendum, because then people could exactly decide on whether they want to go with a no-deal Brexit that is apparently on the table now. Or not.
I mean, it's interesting with this question of whether or not he's bluffing. It's because the consequences of every option taken by whomever takes them, there were warnings today about whether he can be held back in contempt, for example, if he doesn't follow the law.
We're really in an unprecedented situation where obviously there have been times when prime ministers have in the past kind of inadvertently not respected the law, but for one who's basically going, I'm going to basically, under no circumstances am I going to be willing to do what Parliament tells me, is quite extraordinary. So he either brings himself close to breaking the law and Parliament may no confidence in him, or he does the U-turn and says, OK, I agree, and I think that's extremely unlikely because it would put him in a very delicate situation. Or also being debated is that he resigns. He essentially says, I am the martyr in this case. Parliament forced me to resign. Now we're going to have a general election.
Can he put forward a no-confidence vote on himself, on his own government? I read that as a possibility.
It sounds absurd, but we think that is possible, but they haven't actually gone so far as to do that yet.
Okay.
The difficulty is they've kind of bound themselves, the Conservatives, because they're closing down Parliament with prorogation tonight. So actually that route, they haven't got enough time to do that now. So we don't think that that's now going to be possible. So yeah, but that was seriously debated, whether Boris Johnson would bring a vote of no confidence in himself in order to force an early election.
What a strange world, yeah. And then you've got opposition who will say the opposite.
Which would be crazy, exactly right. So the opposition would have confidence in Boris Johnson, while Boris Johnson would not have confidence in himself. It's an absurd situation.
But I mean, look at what he's done to the political culture in Great Britain, which was one of the hard chambers of democracy. And I loved watching these debates even before that, were very engaged but very disciplined, and you always knew they are playing according to the rules, and that's what he puts into question, and that is a very dangerous thing.
So there you go, that's what Hannah Neumann thinks, and John Worth. And what do you think? Get in touch and let us know. We already have one caller on the line, Anne from Norfolk. So Anne, good evening to you, and thank you so much for calling us here tonight. What do you think? Is Boris Johnson bluffing?
Of course he's not. He will go right to the line. The people who are bluffing is the commissioners. They want to put up a new Berlin Wall. That's what it comes down to between two speaking countries that speak the same language. Do you think that is democracy? No, it is not.
Reactions?
I'm rather confused, Anne. You mean he's putting up a wall, the commissioners are putting up a wall where exactly?
In Ireland and Northern Ireland. There.
Yeah,
they call it the backstop, but it's not. It's more or less a Berlin Wall going up.
I mean, the point is at the moment, and we don't not have a wall. So the whole debate about how can we secure this border only comes from a Brexit discussion. So that's why I'm not sure. First of all, I hope we will fight, even if there's a Brexit solution, that does not mean a wall, because it's put the whole fragile situation in Northern Ireland at stake. But even if we don't have another solution than finding a wall, it's not the European Commission, frankly, but the guy who puts up the idea of Brexit and defends it to the utmost end of even having to put on a wall because there are no other solutions, because he refuses to go with the deal that the EU has suggested.
And ultimately, if the UK leaves the European Union, you have to do border controls somewhere. Do you do those at the border between Ireland and Northern Ireland, in the Irish Sea, or if you don't do any border controls anywhere, that essentially means the UK has to a large extent, still respect European Union rules, i.e. you go for a softer form of Brexit. Those are your three options, ultimately. Now, the European Union has very categorically said, no hard border in Ireland. So basically, the EU's priority is no wall, no controls. But the UK, I don't think, has taken the Irish question seriously throughout the whole of the Brexit situation.
So, Anne, how would you respond to that? It's the UK that's not taking the Irish question
look how little there was debated about the Irish question during the referendum campaign, for example. So the costs to Ireland, both Northern Ireland and the Irish Republic, were not taken seriously before the 2016 vote.
Let's pause for a minute. And Anne, what's your reaction to what John Worth and Hannah Neumann are saying here in the studio?
We have always taken Northern Ireland seriously. I don't know where you're coming from, young man. And secondly, the Commission at first gave us just oh God, I've forgotten the word now. Gave us just the
backstop.
No,
not the backstop. An extension? We're all
sorry, just the common market. But Theresa May turned it down. So then they go right back again.
You mean
and
the
then
customs
put
union, maybe?
Northern Ireland into the picture. Therefore, it wasn't never there before.
No, but
so
sorry,
what has changed their minds?
No, but wait, but essentially the European Union would very much happily have the whole of the UK, even after Brexit, still in the single market and still in the customs union. And that would basically mean that there would be no border in Ireland. Job done. But that type of way leaving the European Union was turned down by Theresa May, right? It was not hard enough for her. So if you take Britain further out of the European Union, you leave the customs union, you leave the single market, then you end up having a border somewhere. And you have to work out, where do you draw that border? Now, ultimately, that's a key irreconcilable issue within the heart of the Brexit conundrum, which remains unanswered. If Britain wants to leave the EU single market and customs union, you need a border somewhere. Where do you put that border?
Right. Okay. Thank you, Anne from Norfolk, for calling in. I just want to talk about that. You're right. The question is, where would that border be? So do you think, you were talking about this before the show, we would eventually end up with the EU's initial suggestion of having Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland rather than the entire UK? Are we going to end up with where we started off?
Well, that was the original form of the so-called backstop. It basically said you had a special status for the kind of softer Brexit for Northern Ireland, if you like, and then you do customs controls on the ferries between Northern Ireland and Great Britain.
Right.
That would have a certain elegance to it as a solution, but bear in mind that's completely impossible at the moment because the Northern Irish DUP, the Democratic Unionist Party, are in coalition with the Conservatives. So that option is not on the table at the moment. The EU could live with that, but London can't live with that.
So far, though, going back to our question, is Boris Johnson bluffing? No one actually thinks yet that Boris Johnson is bluffing. So let us know what you think. So call in.
Well, Boris Johnson, speaking to the press today in Dublin, he said he had an abundance of proposals to replace the backstop. But
and he said he was trying to get a deal.
I would like to see them at some point.
So would I.
mean, he keeps having them for a long time, but when is the moment that he puts them on the table?
This is a bluff, though, if we're looking for a bluff.
I guess that is
there you go. Yeah. Let's bring in Gary from Berkshire. Gary, good evening to you. Thank you so much for calling us tonight on Raw Politics. Your call. Tell us, what do you think? Is Boris Johnson bluffing?
Thank you for having me on. I broadly agree with everything John has said. I don't think Boris Johnson is bluffing. He has most definitely put himself in a corner that he will find extremely difficult to get out of. But I'd actually just like to comment that what we're seeing is this really hard Brexit approach, which has been taken by members of the ERG and the likes. But what I'd also like to say is, whilst we talk about the approach Boris Johnson takes, and we talk about trade, and we talk about borders and things like this, actually what's really being missed out of this entire discussion is the rights of 65 million or so European citizens that are automatically having their rights eroded overnight, potentially. And that's as important as it may be to a border. We won't see physical infrastructure on Northern Ireland, of that I'm certain. I think we'll probably see it on a ferry somewhere. But that in itself brings lots of difficulty. So actually, I'm still as confused and I'm still Brexit fatigued as I have been now for several months.
I do want to ask you, though, but Gary, when Boris Johnson speaks like this and he's playing hardball and he's saying, under no circumstances am I going to ask for an extension, I'm sticking to the deal, I'm sticking to the October 31st deadline, do you think he's just trying to get leverage back in his negotiations? Because he said he's felt that Parliament's been cutting his legs off in these negotiations. Do you think this is just a way to get leverage so that he comes here feeling like, okay, I'm playing hardball, now it's your turn to move?
Do you know what? I think Boris Johnson, along with Theresa May, have made a huge error. They haven't involved Parliament in the decision-making process in the deal that needs to be made. And to go for leverage by taking this hardball approach, traditionally in negotiations, actually people that have a softer approach to negotiations actually tend to get a little bit more of leeway on both sides. Hardball just puts people's backs up. I mean, to use normal man-on-the-street language, it just puts people's backs up. So I'm not so sure, but I don't think he's bluffing. I think he's made a promise, as John says, that he feels he has to deliver. And hardball just doesn't go with it when we have these big, important, long trusted to some extent and really experienced negotiators in Brussels. So I don't think it is.
All right, thank you for your thoughts there. Gary from Berkshire, interesting points made. We'll get you guys to react to that later, but first we're going to go to a break. But before that, let me recap the questions for our viewers if you're just joining us. So we're asking, is Boris Johnson bluffing? And the second question is, should the EU bow to Turkey's threats? This is with regard to opening the gates to let migrants back into Europe. And the third question is Germany ready to laugh at Hitler? We're referencing a new Disney movie. It's a comedy with Hitler as one of the characters.
Indeed. Our lines will be open for about 30 more minutes, so do get in touch. Our number is 800 333 37002 or email us at rawpaul@euronews.com. Tweet, of course, using that hashtag rawpolitics. But first, a very short break.
Welcome back. You're watching Raw Politics, your call. So before the break, we were talking about the first question, is Boris Johnson bluffing? So we got a couple of callers on that point.
Yeah, and so far our callers reckon that he's not bluffing. Our panellists here, Hannah and John, reckon he's not bluffing. But we've been asking you today on Twitter, we've been polling on this very question, whether or not he's bluffing or not. And in fact, 61% of you say that you do. So if you are one of those who participated in our poll there on Twitter, get in touch, give us a call or drop us an email. Don't be shy.
Yeah, let us know why you think he's bluffing.
To get you joined here in this debate.
Absolutely. Okay, I think we can go to our next caller. Now we have Robert from Northamptonshire. Robert, what do you think? Is Boris Johnson bluffing?
He's certainly bluffing when he claims that he can get a deal.
Yes.
Okay.
I don't know if you noticed today when he was speaking to Leo Varadkar, he was changing his language as he went because he realised Leo had obviously prepared and spoke very eruditely. Boris turned up and, as usual, hadn't really thought about what he was going to be doing or saying. And on the matter of wanting a deal, he first said, I'm looking for a deal, and he very quickly corrected himself and said, I want a deal, trying to appear more tough. You could reasonably ask him when he says, I want a deal, well, what deal do you want, or where are you going to look for it?
And Robert, were you surprised that he didn't do his homework when he was going to Ireland, the country that has most to lose if there is, of course, a no-deal Brexit?
But haven't you noticed for weeks and weeks and weeks, he's just saying, people ask him, will you get us a deal? Yes, I'll get a deal. I'll get a deal. But there's been no mention of what kind of deal he's asking for, let alone how he's going to get it.
And do you think that for Boris Johnson, a no deal, he would crash out of the EU? Do you think? What do you think about the likelihood of that when it comes to Boris Johnson? A no deal.
I think that's his preferred choice.
That is okay.
Even though he was warned, of course, today by Leo Varadkar that even if there is a no deal, that is just the start of a new phase. He said you can't have a clean break from Brexit.
So why do you think that's his preferred deal, Robert?
Nothing has been done recently to achieve a deal. Theresa May, in the last few weeks or months of her prime ministership, was disappearing off to Europe and was coming back with nothing. And I don't think that she was really putting a great deal of effort in. She was trying to look like she was working. Boris Johnson the other day was accused by somebody more, Liam Reeves, of being in the wrong place. He should have been in Brussels. He said, what are you doing in Morley? You should have been in Brussels. And I think his trip to Dublin was really just to make him look like he was putting in effort.
Okay.
Ultimately, we're going to bust out with no deal. And he wants to be able to say, well, it wasn't my fault, I tried. Because his only care is to achieve his lifelong aim of being Prime Minister.
All right. Thank you for calling there for your thoughts. Robert from Northamptonshire, thank you. Let's get our MEP to react to what Robert was saying.
And maybe just to put our viewers into the picture, there is a deal on the table. It's not that we do not have a deal. So there's a deal that has been negotiated for 2 years. It's the best thing everybody could come up with after 2 years.
But it's been rejected 3 times. So
it has been rejected 3 times by the Parliament. But the question is, what is the alternative? Leaving with a no deal, as also Robert just mentioned, that doesn't mean that it's a Brexit and that's it. It just means that we're having to start negotiations again about what the relationship will be between Great Britain and the EU in a far worse situation than what we have now. Because then we have the hard borders, we have all this long line of trucks lining up, we have all these rules, no one knows whether they still work or they still not working. We have all these rights neglected for the British, as I think, as Gary mentioned. And this is the situation. We then should come up with a better deal than what we did the last 2 years. I just think this is not going to work.
And well, just a very, very quick comment. I mean, we have our voters generally saying, we don't believe Boris Johnson is serious. What about those that actually do, that still support Boris Johnson in all of this?
But I think that what Boris Johnson is trying to do is position himself vis-a-vis Nigel Farage and the Brexit Party. Essentially, he fears the hardcore Brexiteers, in this House, after all, right, they got 30% of the vote for the European elections in the UK. And so basically, all of this is dominated, in Johnson's terms, by a tactical decision. He wants to move the Conservative Party onto the turf of Farage's Brexit Party and to win those voters back. What the costs of so doing are to the British economy, to relations with the European Union, he doesn't really care so much. And the second issue is as the caller just said there as well, there's a certain tiredness about the Brexit debate in the UK. Everyone just says, we've had enough of this, we want this to stop. And therefore, the idea that Boris Johnson says, well, OK, we just want this done on 31st of October, that actually works as a message with people. I don't think that Boris Johnson himself is really committed at heart to a no-deal Brexit. We have no idea what Boris Johnson at heart really thinks. He just sees tactical advantage in going for that route in order to win that support back from the Brexit Party.
OK.
He certainly is the missing man around the table tonight, isn't he, to ask him all those questions.
We'd love to have him here.
We would indeed. Well, look, we've a comment in there from Michael Olsen on all of this. He wrote into us on Facebook, and he said, taking the no-deal bargaining chip off the table is about the most irresponsible and reckless decision that the UK could ever make. He reckons it'll give only the EU a carte blanche to take the UK to the cleaners, with the EU never providing a deal that could be acceptable to the UK.
Which is obviously what the opposition want. They want the no deal. They want off the table. They want the no deal off the table.
Yeah, but the thing is that this analogy kind of doesn't work. Very often people go, yeah, it's like, whatever, I'm going to buy a second-hand car, I'm going to get a good deal, well, I'll threaten to walk away so as I can get a better deal. The problem is if Britain leaves the EU with no deal, that damages the UK much more than it damages the EU, because a much higher percentage
so
of
it's not a real
exports,
leverage.
So it's not leverage,
okay.
right? And so that's why actually stopping no deal actually is a good call.
Okay, so let's bring in another caller, Frank from Stoke-on-Trent. Frank, what about you? What do you think? Is Boris Johnson bluffing?
No.
Okay.
No, he's definitely not bluffing. He's got his hands tied at the moment. He's finding it hard, I know, but he's got the support of the people outside London, and that's a fact.
So if if a general election were on the cards, you think Boris Johnson would still do well?
He would do well, yes. Not so much in this area, Stoke-on-Trent. I think Nigel Farage will walk it in this area in Stoke-on-Trent at the moment. I think Nigel Farage will also take Labour votes all over the north of England. And basically what's going to happen is Boris Johnson in a situation now where he's made this statement that he's not leaving, that we're leaving on the 31st. And he's put his reputation on the line for that. So I think when it comes to it, he'll just resign, and then Parliament will have to get somebody to go and stand up and come into the European Union and say, can we have another deal, please, which is against everybody, what everybody wants in England. And if Parliament can get behind Jeremy Corbyn, well, God
so
forbid.
Frank, let me ask you, if so the legislation forces Boris Johnson to ask for that extension and, not get out on October 31st.
He'll refuse to come in
even if
after
it means
extension.
breaking the law, you would want him to do that?
Refuse, yes. No, he'll refuse to come. He'll expect somebody else to do it. He'll resign at that point. He'll resign probably 4 days before we leave, 5 days before we leave. And when he resigns, then it's up to Parliament it's up to Boris Johnson to go to the Queen and say to the Queen that he can't no longer hold the respect.
So when that
Parliament.
happens, Frank, we will replay this and know that you said it on your call. Would you like to react to what Frank's saying?
I agree with that. I think it's actually probably more likely that Boris Johnson would resign rather than actually face such a confidence vote. I just wonder about where the kind of a public opinion is in the UK. There's about 1/4 of the British population that say that they could live with no deal. And the difficulty for Johnson tactically is if he goes for those people, he loses in suburban London and he loses in Scotland. If he stays on a more pragmatic course, he loses, as Frank just said, some of the voters to Nigel Farage's Brexit party. So which way does he go? If he goes hardline, solidly no deal, he loses voters to the Liberals. If he stays pragmatic, he loses voters for Farage's Brexit party. This is a very difficult tactical decision that Boris Johnson has got to make. It's no foregone conclusion that he would win that election if and when that election takes place this autumn.
What do you think, Hannah, if an election were on the table? Or you can react to what Frank was saying as well.
I think it's important that we understand the way Johnson engages as part of the power games. But I think it's also important that we talk about what is at stake at Brexit, because it became some kind of anonymous black box and everybody's just discussing, do we get a deal or no deal, and will we have a Brexit or not? But when you talk to farmers in Great Britain, for example, and I had this experience myself who voted for Brexit, and you tell them, but you're not going to get your subsidies any longer. They say, but then we are out. If you talk about salmon fishers and you say, but there's a problem with the Clear Water Directive because it's a EU directive, I don't know whether it's still going to apply to Great Britain. They say, but then it's a problem for you. If you talk to teenagers and tell them, I don't know whether you can take the cheap flight to Berlin again and get drunk there, they will see a problem. And I think complementary to all this power play discussion, we really have to get back to understanding what is at stake with the Brexit, also for the people in Great Britain, and the thing they value a lot, they might not necessarily associate with the European Union, but they are part of the package.
Because as you were saying, so there's that getting lost in the tactics of the day-to-day, what's happening of the deal versus what you're saying, the bigger picture of what Brexit stands for. All right, if you were just joining us, we are asking 3 questions. I know we've been talking about Brexit, but we actually have 3 questions. So first of all, we're asking, is Boris Johnson bluffing? And the other 2, should the EU bow to Turkey's threat in opening the gates to let migrants into Europe? And the third question, is Germany ready to laugh at Hitler? Because there's a new Disney comedy film with Hitler as one of the characters.
There you go, the best friend or the imaginary friend of a 10-year-old boy. So our lines will be open for about 15 more minutes, so you can give us a shout. Our number is a free phone number. It's 800 33 37 002. You can email us as well at rawpaul@euronews.com, or of course tweet using that hashtag #rawpolitics. But first we're going to just take a very short break. See you in a second.
Welcome back. You're watching Raw Politics, Your Call. So again, before the break, we were talking about Brexit. The question we put to you is Boris Johnson bluffing?
Indeed, and we have now Brian in Hertfordshire who's called us tonight. Thank you so much for your call. Well, what's your take, Brian, on all this? Do you think that Boris Johnson is bluffing or not?
No, I don't believe he is. I believe he's very sincere in not wanting to ask for an extension. Whether that now becomes a case of, because they'll brought in a law to say he must, whether that means he resigns or he just refuses to go to Brussels to ask for that extension remains to be seen. But I do not believe he will personally go to Brussels.
Okay. And do you like what he is doing at the moment? The tactics that John was saying that he says for Boris Johnson, this is all about tactical moves. What's next for Boris Johnson?
I do. I actually love what he's doing, because for 3 years this has gone on, and it's been a stalemate the whole time. If Theresa May, who said no deal is better than no deal is better than a bad deal, had actually meant it, we wouldn't be in this position now, I don't believe. The likes of Philip Hammond, who was the Chancellor who's responsible for planning no deal, basically done nothing in the preparation of no deal. That being the case, 3 years later, Boris has now come in, they've seen they've done nothing, and now he's being criticised for planning no deal.
Okay.
So there you go, Hannah. What do you think? I mean, there's many people calling us like Brian
Do you think it's about frustration? Yeah.
They're just fed up, and they voted to leave over 3 years ago, and that hasn't happened yet. And finally, Boris Johnson is promising to do what they voted for.
I have to say on the European side, we are also a bit fed up because, I mean, there goes so much work of very skillful brain people into this. Everyone's just bothered by what are they going to do, what are they not going to do, the British. Now we have to vote for commission. Great Britain hasn't designated a commissioner because they said they would leave by 31st. Now everyone starts to think about what will we actually do if they ask for an extension, when they go for a commissioner, what would happen to the commissioner and the portfolio if he leaves. It's a total mess and a total nightmare. And I would rather like to have a decision sooner than later. But as a European, I also have to say, if I see any chance for Great Britain to stay, I'm fine with whatever extension there comes that increases this chance for them to stay. Because I think many people voted Remain, that's right. But I'm still not sure whether they are fully aware of what they will get with the no-deal Brexit,
so
whether this is what they voted for.
I just want to put that question to Brian. Brian, there is frustration on your end and people in the UK, but there's also frustration, as Hannah was explaining, on the European side. What about when you say you like what Boris Johnson is doing? Do you think he's doing a better job than Theresa May? I mean, what's different from the two?
Yes, he's only been there for a few weeks, but he's made a decision, and that's what we've lacked in 3 years. No decision was made. The trouble is we've got a Remainer Parliament that does not want to leave under any circumstances, and they're in the majority. And they're using the excuse of we wish to honour the people's vote in the referendum, but they don't. They actually don't want to honour it. They're going to try and drag it out and drag it out.
Okay, Brian, I think our guests
out.
want to respond to you.
But there's a question to you, Brian, with regard to this. Is at the referendum, the decision was stay in the European Union or leave. It did not say under which terms Britain should leave. And there I disagree. I think there is a majority that would be happy with Brexit in the House of Commons, just no agreement on what sort of Brexit. You've probably got about 100 that could live with no deal. You've got about 200 that want Theresa May's deal. And you've got some Labour ones that want a softer Brexit still. But they're all variants of Brexit. So how big an economic price should people pay to deliver Brexit? Brian, what would you do? Are you willing to lose your job? Would you be willing that someone in your family would lose your job? What kind of hit to the economy would you be willing to take?
Okay,
is there any price that is too high?
All right, I think we've lost Brian, but those are good questions to pose to people. Yeah.
And it's interesting how before we were always talking about what kind of a Brexit, a hard Brexit, a soft Brexit, but now it's very much become Brexit or no deal. It's really changed.
There are economic costs of Theresa May's deal as well, because they'll be put a little bit further into the future. But there are costs to businesses of even leaving with Theresa May's deal. The really soft Brexit variants, kind of Norway-style options, are completely off the table at the moment, and we've not come to dealing with that. And I really don't... I understand the frustration, don't get me wrong, and I accept that the vote happened, but Britain has still not resolved this fundamental tension. What sort of Brexit is acceptable? And is there a sort of Brexit that has majority support in the British population? I'm not sure there is. Any one variant. Brexit is an idea, perhaps, but one practical, doable
Which
Brexit.
kind of...
There isn't a majority for that.
All right. I think we have to go to a break first. I think we have callers on the line, but let's get back to them after the break. So the question we're asking you, if you're just joining us, is Boris Johnson bluffing? All these moves happening in the UK, if you could follow. And the second question, should the EU bow to Turkey's threats on opening the gates and letting migrants into Europe if they don't get the support that they need and they want for the migrants there? And third question, is Germany ready to laugh at Hitler? This is based on a Disney comedy with Hitler as one of the characters.
There you go. 3 very different, diverse topics there. Our lines are open for about 7 more minutes. So see you after the short break and hopefully talk to you or see you even on Skype if you want to call us there.
welcome back. You're watching Raw Politics, Your Call. So the question we've been talking about is Boris Johnson bluffing? Obviously talking about the moves in the UK related to Brexit. So let's bring in our caller, Jean from Cambridge. Jean, what do you think? Is Boris Johnson bluffing?
No, not at all.
Okay, so what do you think he's doing?
Well, everybody there talks about intransigence, and surely the only thing stopping a deal is the backstop. Okay, so why doesn't the EU Commission or whoever do a special deal? Merkel did a special deal with Turkey. All special deals go on all the time. There's not much democracy in the EU anyway. So why don't we just drop the backstop? When you talk about numbers, that chap there, there's only, 5 million people in the whole of Scotland, the whole of Southern Ireland. If you put that together, that's 10 million people, the whole population, and yet 17 million voted out.
Okay.
So, I mean, it's disproportionate. Why not?
All right. So Jean's point is on the backstop. But thank you, Jean, from Cambridge, for calling us. I mean, I think people with an opinion on whether or not it could easily be solved, this backstop. If it would, it would have been.
This town is. I want to see
go ahead.
I just want to see how it can easily be solved. So at the moment, backstop is the best option we could come up with over 2 years for this problem. If there is an easy solution, I'm willing to take it and to discuss it, but I haven't seen it.
Right. It's true the EU is masters at coming up with fudges at late night summits, but they haven't just managed. We have a comment there on Twitter from Philip Stewart saying that Boris Johnson is not bluffing. He's lying. According to Philip Stewart, there has been zero evidence of him seeking a better deal, and no deal is his preferred option.
All right, so there you go. So there's one there that doesn't think Boris Johnson is a bluffing, which is a different term. Okay, so quick, just last comment, John, from what our caller was saying. Very quickly.
The thing with the backstop is a guarantee that there should be no hard border in Ireland. It is only to be used if no other solutions are to be found. British government, show us those solutions and you're not going to need the backstop. The backstop is an excuse because basically Brexiteers have not confronted the fundamental contradictions in Brexit. And sorry, but our caller Jean has not confronted those problems either.
All right. Okay, so now it's time for Raw Politics, Your Call, Last Word.
I don't know what this is.
All right, so this is a tweet by Guy Verhofstadt because John Bercow, Speaker of the House, had said that this is probably his last time as a Speaker after 10 years. So Guy Verhofstadt said John Bercow is a driven speaker and gifted orator, but above all, the keeper of the great British parliamentary tradition. I would love if we could welcome him in the European Commission or the European Parliament. Do you think we'll see John Bercow here? What do you guys think?
That would be quite amusing.
We have this jug at home because I have 3 kids and everything's quite a bazaar.
So we might.
And then my husband sometimes.
All right, we're running out of time. All right. Thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you for watching tonight. See you.